Stepping into this space of leadership in the great city of Atlanta, and of course in Atlanta Public Schools, has been a whirlwind. At the same time, stepping into the superintendency is one thing. Stepping into it during a pandemic, well, that's a place that nobody could have prepared me for, or I would imagine any of us for. To that end, we want to continue to do the things that are necessary to make sure that children are well. And for me, as I'm learning our system and leading our system, we're just very careful around decision making and ushering in what we trust and believe are the best practices around our core business for children. Yeah, so from the moment we've started, even when we opened in August on the 24th, completely virtual, there was already a plan in place relative to when would we inevitably reopen. So that plan has been an ongoing a set of actions and review. We had to then take into consideration, obviously, the things that we've talked about from the very beginning, public health data and feasibility for readiness when the time would be right. When we released the first day of school information on August 24th, we said over the course of the next 9 weeks, we will also continue to do health checks. And when we got closer to October, which we are now in October, we would start to then share thoughts and considerations for what reopening could look like, assuming that we see something favorable with public health data. There are so many moving parts to the school system from an operational standpoint for readiness with the pandemic, whether it's the safety of PPE or social distancing or sanitizing, but then that's also tied to human capital, our teachers, our principals, our staff, bus drivers, et cetera. So all of those factors are a part of a very complex consideration. What we shared was a proposed plan right now that says if we still see this favorable trend with community spread going down for the appropriate amount of time, October 26th would allow for us to have options that give families a chance to remain virtual, if that is their desire. But if we move into the second option, which is face-to-face, that we would do that and scale that out by grade levels, starting with our elementary and our special education students. Really what you've spoken to is the greatest component of the dilemma. Our core business is teaching and learning, and in the way that we've tried our best as educators, not just in the city of Atlanta, but across this country, figure out how to navigate that during a pandemic. It has been complex, and even in this launch of virtual, we recognize that there are students who have experienced significant learning loss. That didn't start in August. It started back in March when the disruption happened in the second semester, and then, of course, the summer, and then from the summer to returning. It's been significant. That's the stuff that you don't sleep well over at night, each night, because you know that we've got to do what we have to for students who not only could be lost, but who need services that can't always be delivered virtually. In that same space, there are voices and there are members of our community who are not necessarily on the same side, but we recognize that it does not do us well to be divided. We acknowledge that there are parents and families who have requested face-to-face now, immediately, full-time, no hybrid. And then there are those who are not a fan of hybrid. And then there are those who have also said, could we please remain virtual for as long as possible? We take all of that into consideration in order to render a recommendation that keeps us safe, but also saves our children. It's a unique combination. I appreciate the way you asked the question. That's been what has been a part of the formula. And I can't tell you that there's a perfect end result. It's not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. But we are taking in the feedback. We are listening to experts. We interface with districts who've done it already and districts who are similar to us to gauge best practices for that. And what we propose, we recognize that if we have to pause and revisit it, we have to own that that's a reality as well. That's twofold. In Atlanta Public Schools, teleworking has always been and will continue to be an option. And so if there's anyone with a compromised situation in terms of their health or even in their caregiving, they have the opportunity to apply for telework. We're not challenging that in the space where they will be penalized. We are working along those lines to account for that and then figure out what we need to do to be able to deliver on the work. At the same time, where we've taken and queried our staff, particularly our teaching population, population. They've been very clear that their first concern is tied to safety, PPE equipment, the appropriate amount, cleanliness, sanitizing, having the appropriate resources, and we've communicated what we have. We will continue, however, to communicate that, because the lesson that we're learning even in the right now is that over communication is not a problem, it's a plus. And to that same end, we will continue the conversations and be responsive to the questions that they're continuing to ask, so that there's enough information that can give some level of reassuredness. Is just simply important right now. So that's part of the intent with Wednesday. So it's an asynchronous day, which means students would be working independently with virtual learning, but schools will then have the opportunity to do a deep cleaning on Wednesdays as well as Fridays after the other 2-day face-to-face engagement. In addition to that, it's an opportunity for teachers to have professional learning and to also gauge and assess practices from the first 2 days. In addition to that, it's also a space for us to intervene and provide interventions and supports in smaller numbers with our students and families. Relative to the cleaning and sanitization, we're utilizing CDC-approved sanitation, sanitization, such a word, resources. We are cleaning. We have shared examples of what that would look like around, the time of day or even in the evenings when we're executing cleaning. We're also doing the same thing with our buses. Hand sanitizer, of course, is a part of now standard protocol in all of our buildings. In addition to the ongoing mandate that masks must be worn, and short of this interview, the mask is always on inside of our school buildings and our central offices, and the 6 feet, as much as we can continue to practice that for social distancing purposes as well. So there are 2 data points that are critical in that, and this window right now is what's going to be a critical time to gather it. Once we secure the intent, the declaration of intent from parents, we will also match that against the staffing model as it relates to the percentages across all of our schools where staff are able to return or to do telework. And then from there, we will have to then identify where the feasibility is for those who have elected to do option 2 because of a greater need versus those who will remain virtual. And so we do that independently across each school, and administration will work with them in that regard. We do want to emphasize that as much as we can still consider the safest option in that space that allows for us to operate virtually is one to absolutely consider. And then if you choose not to, even if you choose transportation, there are only so many opportunities for us to do reassurances. So we want parents to think carefully, because if they choose face-to-face, it's not the same experience as the past. It is very controlled. It has to be highly managed. And there are a lot of things that we've done in the past that we think we would step into that we simply cannot. And so that needs to be a part of that consideration. If they've done the declaration of intent and they are kind of going back and forth, they have until October 12th to finalize that decision. They can go back in and amend accordingly. If you're meaning the end of the year, December, that's where we will all land, because we're going to be watching the data to see where we are, to see what January to May will look like. And because this is such an unpredictable season, we're taking it in phases such as that, semester to semester. So what I would say is that as an administration in a school system, we've taken into consideration all of the important information that helps us render a safe and effective environment. But we also realize that virtual has worked for a number of our families, and if virtual is working and you have reason to continue that, you're encouraged to do just that. At the same time, we were very targeted around the populations that we've identified in that first wave of phase-in, because we recognize that for many, the need is different around our opportunity to provide face-to-face. Please think in that space around that need to do that, so that we can work to accommodate and successfully render teaching and learning in a way that is safe for all. And what we are committed to continue to work towards is still a safe environment. This is a new territory for all of us. Our commitment is to execute at the highest level possible as best we can. But there are households and homes where these decisions have to be made. And we want families to think about what is safe, what allows for us to still manage and navigate well, and how we can effectively support learning for every child that we serve. Well, we'll continue to launch a round of town halls and what we call digital fireside chats. And so parents can connect. That information is available on our district website. And as I said earlier, we recognize that over communication is the best thing that we can possibly do at this time. So for them to simply stay connected. So I don't know. Yeah, and you mentioned that. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to it. We have been very intentional in our support services offices and departments. That's our school counselors and social workers, to be able to track and reach out to families where students have been absent. Whereas we're proud of what our login rate has looked like, we also know where students have simply not shown up. And I also have to acknowledge our principals and teachers who know who those students are. And we've done extensive outreach. COVID makes it a challenge to just simply show up at the door, but we have had schools where incentives have been provided, particularly at the secondary level, so that we can invite and keep our students connected. But where they are not, we are doing everything that we can and are open to even more suggestions to track them down and figure out what is going on so that we can support that. Well, the incentives have varied. So teachers have become incredibly creative around how do you give behavioral incentives in a virtual environment, whether that's we all show up on a pajama day or something to that effect, and then different types of incentives that are more secondary specific, and that could vary from sponsors helping to provide devices to other types of creative ways to keep our students connected.